Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and participants, it is my great honor to welcome you all to the 24th National Conference on Educational Science. I was privileged to coordinate the plenary presentations. My name is Zsuzsanna Demeter Karászi. Each year, this prestigious event provides a platform for educators, researchers, and professionals to engage with pressing issues in education. The organizers make it a priority to focus the conference on a relevant and impactful theme, and this year is no different. The title of the conference is Instruction and Education in the Service of Societal Welfare, Challenges of Education and Institution in the Age of Crisis. Over the past few years, we have all faced exemplary challenges on a global scale, from health crisis to social and economical upheavals, making this topic incredibly timely and critical for exploration in both education and research. Today, we are privileged to have an exceptional keynote speaker who will help us delve deeper into the explanations of this theme. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Angelika Paseka from the University of Hamburg in Germany. She holds a doctorate in sociology and has a postdoctoral lecture qualification in educational science. She has been working in teacher education since 1992 at several institutions in Austria, before changing to the University of Hamburg in 2010. Her current research interests focus teacher professionalism, uncertainty, and family-school partnership, and she is expert in qualitative methods in educational research. She was for 8 years council member of the Austrian Society of Research and Development in Education, and this time presenting Austria in the EERA Council. She is co-founder and co-editor of the Zeitschrift für Bildungsforschung, as well as author and co-author of several publications. She has also made significant contributions to the MTAD Partners Teacher Cooperation Research Group through her publications and extensive expertise in various educational fields. We have had the honor of welcoming her as a guest speaker in our academic cycles, where her insights have enriched our understanding of collaborative education. Professor Paseka has contributed significantly to our understanding of how education systems respond to crisis, how parental involvement in the educational scenario is perceived, and how teachers and institutions can innovate in the face of advertise is perceived, and how teachers and institutions can innovate in the face of advertise, creating an environment in which students not only cope with thrive, even in the most difficult circumstances. Her plenary address, titled Education in Times of Crisis, Challenges and Opportunities for Learning, will explore how crises challenge traditional educational models while simultaneously creating opportunities for growth, adaptation, and retaking the way we engage learners. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Angelika Paseka.
Well, thank you. Üdvözlöm Önöket, örülök, hogy itt lehetek. That was the most difficult part of my presentation, I think, to learn that. I want really to thank you with all my heart for the invitation to Debrecen, this university, and for introducing me. The topic I will be speaking about is crisis. I experienced crisis just yesterday as I was arriving in your wonderful country and I was not able to understand a word. But Katinka and Katalin, I couldn't see them quite now, they guided me so well that all crises were overcome. So I thank them very much. Well, living in an age of crisis, that is the theme of this conference. Crisis, a word we probably do not want to hear anymore. Crises seem to be everywhere, in all parts of the world, in our lives, multidimensional, intermingled with each other, and visible in our media every day, with millions of pictures that demonstrate the different aspects of crisis. Just to mention some, and Susanna mentioned already some, but I want to add some further on. We are facing climate change, which affects all of us, however, in different ways. Too much summer, too much heat, too little water and droughts on the one side, too much water and floods on the other side, and we have flood crisis in some parts of Europe very heavily at the moment. The climate change affects food production and produces poverty and hunger. We can find economic depression in many parts of the world in combination with financial crisis that touch whole societies, but also families and individuals as a result of losing one's workplace, closed factories and less money for consuming, with consequences for the production of such goods. See, for example, the car industry at the moment across Europe. Globalization for many years had a positive image with the idea that we can become closer to each other and can take part in the lives of many people around the world. For example, as tourists, but also as Erasmus students or something like that. And of course, media that bring global world into our living rooms. But this has turned into a negative image. Globalization means too many tourists in some places, too many flights that pollute the air, and globalization also means that local crises are not local anymore, but have to be seen in a larger global context. Migration has always taken place, but now migration has become global as well, as a result of economic crisis, hunger, poverty, and also crisis of democracy and military conflicts. Partly quite close to our borders, others seem far away and we hardly notice them. I just want to remind of the Sudan. And as another facet of globalization, we experience crisis in values. As Europeans, we thought that our values are international and valid in all parts of the world. And now we are confronted that our so-called European values are partly not accepted and never have been accepted. And we experience new forms of technology in medicine or media production, but also artificial intelligence that trigger our existing system of values also at the universities. Of course, I could mention many more crises, but that is not in the focus of my presentation. I want to put crisis in the context of education. This presentation is about links between crisis and education. And the first link was opened by the German educational scientist Wolfgang Klafki. He already defined in the 1980s so-called epochal key problems of mankind that should be included in the curricula of schools as cross-sectional issues. What becomes obvious, if you see at the list, nearly all crises mentioned before are included, partly with other words. However, I want to go beyond listing crisis in the context of education and asking which crisis should be on the agenda of schools. So in the next 35 minutes, the following topics will be on the agenda to find a path through crisis in education. I want to clarify and reflect our thinking about crisis by looking at its original meaning and what crises have to do with uncertainty. In the next step, I will put crisis and uncertainties into the context of education by offering a theoretical background and empirical examples. At the end of my way through education in times of crisis, I would like to think about consequences for teacher education. But first, I would like to start with several authors and the question, what does it mean to live in an age of crisis? Already in 1986, Ulrich Beck gives a description and evaluation of the current situation of society. His thesis, in modern society, the production of wealth systematically goes in hand with the production of crisis. So he calls society a risk society. 10 years later, he published another book, Reflexive Modernization, together with Anthony Giddens and Scott Lash, in which the authors analyzed the situation again. And the result, according to the authors, a new fragility of social situations and biographies is emerging, even behind the facades of established prosperity. This development goes hand in hand with an increase of social insecurities, a lack of safety, and loss of certainty about the future, the belief in science, and the opinion of experts. Zygmunt Bauman, a Polish-British sociologist and philosopher, describes our age as liquid modernity, that is characterized by its fragility, temporariness, vulnerability, and inclination to constant change. In his analysis of the current situation, he concludes that change is the only permanence and uncertainty the only certainty. Such an endemic uncertainty, including insecurity of the present and uncertainty about the future, produces fear, because neither the present nor the future no longer seem to be under control. However, what people are longing for is more certainty. The openness of society, therefore, is tried to be reduced. Now let's look at another author, at Thomas Bauer's book, The Unification of the World, on the Loss of Ambiguity and Diversity. His thesis is that our time is a time of low tolerance for ambiguity. In many areas of life, offers that promise salvation from the unavoidable ambiguity of the world therefore appear attractive. What people are longing for, he describes, is to reduce uncertainty, ambiguity, and diversity. However, there is a need for enlarging one's tolerance of ambiguity. That means to develop the ability to withstand ambiguities, irresolvable contradictions, and uncertainties, but not only in others, but also in oneself. And the last author, Hartmut Rosa, a German sociologist, in following him, crises occur as experience of unavailability. The goal of late modernity is to make the world available. That means to know, reach, conquer, calculate, control, or use the objects of the world. But when technology fails, a monstrous unavailability sets in. The consequences are experiences of powerlessness and an unleashing of uncontrollability that leads to crisis-like experiences. After setting the frame, I would want to ask, what do such general considerations mean for education in times of crisis, uncertainties, risks, fragility, and unavailability? That is one of the questions we try to answer in our research group, Uncertainty as a Dimension of Pedagogical Action at the University of Hamburg. And I'd like to offer 3 considerations. The first consideration, the value of knowledge has changed. There is no certainty about knowledge anymore. Although there is much and even more and more knowledge, we have to become aware that the more we know, the more we do not know. Our knowledge is limited. New forms of not knowing or nescience occur. Not yet knowing, by hoping that we will know more if we only try. not being able to know, as we are confronted with the unavailability of knowledge and the fact that there are so many unknown parameters for creating knowledge. Third, not wanting to know, a strategy to cope with crisis and uncertainty. And the fourth one is selective not knowing, because we choose what we want to know, a strategy to cope with the complexity of life. A second consideration, working in schools and at universities, we have to prepare the next generation for coping with crisis, with uncertainty, and such forms of not knowing. It seems necessary to look behind the facades of social conditions and the de-traditionalization in all parts of life. The uncontrollability of the world, as mentioned before, have to be critically reflected. The young generation must learn to ask questions and to find new solutions in and for the future. Students must acquire a critical lens to be able to understand as well as to live amidst this uncertainty with so much not knowing. And a third consideration, as educational scientists working in teacher education, we have to ask which consequences derive from such consideration for our profession, for the courses we offer, and the curriculum in initial teacher education, as well as in-service trainings for teachers working already in schools. But before going on, I would like to have a closer look at the term crisis and to clarify its meaning. The word crisis derives from the Greek krisis and means discrimination, decision. The noun is derived from the verb krino, which means to distinguish, to choose, to decide. In the Latin language, the term crisis was used at first in a medical context, referring to the development of a disease when a change indicates either recovery or death. Here, crisis is defined as a turning point. Today, the term crisis is used quite often and means something negative. Crisis refers to a difficult situation and a difficult time and stands for the peak and turning point of a dangerous development. The sociologist Ulrich Oevermann took a closer look at crisis by using the original meaning, making a decision. According to Oevermann, a crisis is always connected with routines. He emphasizes the dialectic between them. Crisis means having to make a decision as routines do not work anymore. A crisis therefore requires a reopening of the future, whereas routines represent a closure of the crisis. Crisis can be defined as the moment when previous routines fail and it becomes necessary to make decisions based upon assumptions and into the open. It's uncertain whether the decision to solve a crisis proves their worth in the future, so that perhaps new routines can emerge. Which educational ideas of crisis do exist? And I want to refer to two authors. The educational idea of crisis points to a critical moment in learning processes, in which learners find themselves thrown into the puzzling and dilemmatic situations. As such, crisis can be associated with an opportunity to critically rethink how one can understand the world, others, and oneself. And John Dewey does not often use the term crisis in relation to individual learning processes. However, in a key passage, he points to what the idea of being a crisis means in human experience. Every crisis, whether of the individual or of the community, reminds man of the precarious and partial nature of the control he exercises. For Dewey, the idea that humans experience limits to their own knowledge and ability when they try to act in the world grounds his idea of what it means to learn. These limit experiences occur when we try to do something and are met with an unexpected response from the world or others. These are the moments when opportunities arise for us to question what we have taken for granted as true, known, or part of what we are able to do. These moments are experienced as discontinuities in learning, breaks or interruptions in the smooth flow of experience, which inform how we understand ourselves and the world around us, and thus how we create meaning. And these moments mark the beginning of learning. In these moments, we fall into perplexity, confusion, or doubt, because we either do not know what the problem is, or we have a problem and do not know what the solution is. From an educational point of view, these moments are significant and thus require the learner to reflectively search for a way out, asking, what happened? What went wrong? Following Dewey, only when there is a crisis of uncertainty are we called on to genuinely reflect on the conditions of our situation, which involves directly analyzing the nature of our uncertainty and on that basis reflectively judging how to respond. Arno Combe, a German educational scientist, partly draws on Dewey and takes up the idea of crisis in his theory of learning. Together with Ulrich Gebhardt, with whom he published, among others, the book Verstehen im Unterricht, he is particularly concerned with how learning from experience is possible in the context of schooling. In learning processes focused on understanding, learning begins with a crisis of the usual, which Combe and Gebhardt also describe as perplexity, presumption of the foreignness, and experience of difference. A crisis occurs when students are trying to understand the subject matter of instruction. In this process, students experience a difference between their own perspective and the unfamiliar, different perspective of others, and on this basis enter into an experiential crisis. According to Combe and Gebhardt, in a crisis, the relationship between the outer and the inner world of an individual becomes unstable because an unexpected experience and a perplexity, the psychic equivalent of crisis, have occurred. Such a perplexity forces the subject to reflect and rethink the new situation. Much like Dewey, the view that in these moments well-known knowledge and routines cannot be taken for granted anymore, and this can force the individual to transform existing knowledge. Crisis, therefore, might be fruitful or productive moments, as Coppi puts it, in which new paths must be taken, new knowledge must be created, decisions within an uncertain future must be made. So that was the theory. After looking at this theoretical background, I would like to give you some examples from school and contrast them with the results from a review that our uncertainty research group carried out. The first example is taken from a research project carried out together with my colleague Ilse Schrittesser from the University of Vienna. The focus was on innovative learning environments. Schools who thought that they offered such innovative learning environments could take part. Videos were taken from several lessons and transcripts were made. In a further step, we reanalyzed some of these transcripts through the lens of learning. And the following situation happened in a gymnasium, an academic secondary school with students about 13 years old, grade 7. In a physics lesson on the subject Ohm's law, electric circuit, voltage, resistance, current, the teacher had first built a simple battery using 2 pieces of metal and a lemon and was demonstrating it. 23 students watched her. And now that's the transcript. Teacher, say nothing. Now we build the whole thing. Takes a leaf out of the lemon. Yes? Karin, a student. Is that only possible with a lemon or is it also possible with something else? Teacher, well, you can do it with something else too. I'll just show you now something else. Loud conversations start. The teacher continues working on her experiment. She replaces a metal plate with a carbon stick. Bernd, why do we actually use a lemon as a battery? Teacher, so what I've built now points to parts in the lemon with zinc and the carbon rod. That's what's really inside a battery. The sequence is about setting up a battery and teaching the students what components are needed to make a battery work. The teacher sets up the experiment with the help of a lemon. A simple galvanic element is built into which two metal plates are inserted, with the lemon juice serving as the electrolyte. A student now asks whether this experiment is only possible with a lemon, a question that suggests that the student experiences a crisis of the usual. She obviously was perplexed, irritated, confused, and has doubts. The question might be interpreted that she has been thinking along and is now asking questions and wants to know more. She apparently wants to know what exactly it is about this lemon, and that causes electricity to focus. Electricity to flow. The teacher does not really respond to this question. This causes unrest in the class. Bernd doesn't give up and asks again specifically, but here too, the question insisting on concretization is not taken up any further. Both questions are actually a stroke of luck, pointing to a learning opportunity that is opening up but is not being seized by the teacher. The question disappeared between experiment, trying to keep the class quiet, and the transfer of knowledge. But what about the teacher? She's obviously very preoccupied with the subject, the experiment. The student's question is open and the teacher experiences a crisis as well. What to do? She tries to answer the question briefly, while you can do it with something else. The answer is correct in itself. The student no longer urges, the teacher can turn back to the experiment. Another student asks the question, again, in a slightly different way. Again, what to do? This question is now completely ignored by the teacher and is not taken up again in the further course. The institutional framing of the scene does not allow for a student question. An experiment has to be shown to demonstrate how a battery works. This is obviously part of the curriculum and therefore a must in class. The experiment is planned, everything is set up, the clock is ticking, the lesson must be brought to an end. The questions are not assessed as a fruitful moment. Instead of, they create a crisis and uncertainty, they distract and are therefore quickly dealt with or ignored. A second example is taken from Koppai and was used by Arno Komm and myself in a paper published in 2012. The situation happens in an elementary school, grade 3, in a science lessons. The students have explored the surroundings of the school site with their teacher and rebuilt them in a sandbox. The results are written down on the blackboard. The children now have to recognize the most important mountains, hills, and places on a map. The teacher works out with them what the numbers next to the names of the mountains mean. During the class discussion, one pupil asks, "How can you measure mountains?" The teacher does not answer this question, but lets the children develop hypotheses and tests them together with them in the sandbox. How do we interpret this situation in the light of learning? The actual object of instruction in this scene is the map, how to read it and how to interpret the signs of it. The teacher has built up the path from reality to the map with the help of a prepared environment in methodical didactic steps. In the middle of the planned elaboration phase, a student asked a question that actually does not fit in, thus opening up a subject area that was not intended. So how did the teacher deal with this crisis, this perplexity? One possibility would be to answer the question himself and give explanation. This would be very quick and would only interrupt the planned course of the lesson for a few minutes. We've seen the example before. One of the many other ideas would be to pass the question on to the children and take them seriously as co-constructors of lessons capable of participation. That could need time. However, he decided for option 2 and tried it out. The situation required the teacher to go back to the sandbox with the students. The students developed fantasies about how the mountains could be measured. By letting that happen, the teacher evoked further considerations and an exchange of hypotheses among his students. Together, they found the correct answer. He did not dismiss this question, but recognized it as a fruitful moment for the students' learning processes. The teacher had to reinterpret the situation. The precondition for this was that he has specialized subject knowledge, a subject-specific didactic knowledge, as well as general pedagogical knowledge about how children think at this age and what they are capable of understanding. Caused by the situation, the teacher left the routines of his preparation and tried to find a new way by reopening his plan. A third example is taken from a paper published in 2024 in English language. The authors are all members of the uncertainty group from the Faculty of Education, responsible for different subjects: English as a foreign language, physical education, drama, and biology. In all 4 subjects and the lessons carried out, there is a big difference compared to the 2 previous examples. In the previous examples, crises occurred in the flow of the interaction between students and teachers. The students triggered the crisis and the teachers had to deal with them. In the lessons described in this paper, crises happened the other way around. The teachers triggered crisis and the students had to deal with them. The teachers used crisis and uncertainties consciously. I chose observations of an English lesson. In the English classroom, grade 12, students were confronted with Jamaica Kincaid's text Girl, which is highly disruptive because of its linguistic ambiguity, its genre transgressions, and its criticism of existing power. Why should this text produce crisis and uncertainties? Crisis and uncertainties can emerge from the foreignness of the text, which requires intense negotiation of meaning, and from the absence of any didactic pre-structuring of the situation. And these were the reactions, the responses the authors found. And you see the name they give them and an explanation afterwards, and I will give you some examples. So they found unspecific responses. Signs were hesitating about one's own interpretation, laughing, shouting as a sign of frustration, using conditional like perhaps, maybe. They found also specific responses. Juxtaposition, as when the students created analogies, asked questions, made simplifications like the text is set in an undeveloped country, but none of these reactions helped to create meaning. They found also exploration. Students explored the situation through creating metaphorical analogies, through creating verbal associations, and re-signification of core terms. But they found also signs of rejection. Students subverted the setting through phonetic ironization with an exaggerated American, British, or German accent, or they subverted through a taboo-breaking rejection of the task. For example, let's smoke some weed. What becomes evident that teachers' idea to initiate crises as starting points for learning processes was partly successful and partly not. Some of the students seized the opportunity and immersed into this challenging text. Others just let themselves get involved superficially, and others even refused an immersion. What do these examples show us? Lessons are full of crises and uncertainties, with not knowing and not being able to know. Crises and uncertainties can be found in the interactions between teachers and students when the planned lesson content clashes with the stubborn and differently motivated approaches of the learners and triggers different learning processes. Crises and uncertainties can be found in the dynamic of the whole school class, when impulses not only affect individuals, but also the network of relationships of an entire group. And crises and uncertainties occur in the learning processes and their results, as there is no guarantee that learning will lead to a successful outcome. And what the authors found also were that there are several strategies to cope with crisis and uncertainties. And we found the following strategies in more than 200 papers we analyzed in our uncertainty groups. One strategy is to see uncertainty as a challenge that must be avoided by blocking out uncertainties and resisting to deal with them, or by overcoming uncertainties just superficially. Another strategy is to see uncertainties as a chance or opportunity for learning by seizing uncertainty and trying to find a way through, or even by initiating uncertainty on the side of the teacher. Finally, I would like to ask, what does this mean for teacher education in an age of crisis, in a time that is characterized by fragility and risks? What consequences can be derived from the previous considerations? Trying to answer this question, we have to look at the education system in general and the teaching profession in particular. On the one hand, it has to be realized that the education system is fraught with uncertainty in all areas of teaching and learning, from the curricula to the teaching to assessment. So teachers have to deal with a wide range of crises and uncertainties that are inherent in the teaching profession, and dealing with uncertainties is one of the key characteristics of professions in general, not only for the teaching profession. Against this background, a first conclusion for teacher education is that uncertainty has to be made explicit on several occasions within teacher programs to give student teachers the opportunity to become aware of these key characteristics of their future job, and that it is, at least in many cases, not their fault if they experience crisis. However, we have to realize that not all pre-service teachers will engage with crisis. Some will just take a surface approach. In that case, deep, meaningful learning can hardly happen. Anyway, here are some examples, but I'm sure you will know and imagine many other settings as well. One option would be during practical phases in schools when student teachers act as teachers and experience complex situations that require decision-making, and in addition, by encouraging them to initiate perplexities and uncertainties in their classes by leaving traditional concepts of learning. Another example would be to set up special courses where the student teachers are confronted with outdoor experiences, including lots of crises and uncertainties, how to go on. Andreas Bonnet and Jocelyn Glacier from our group describe how experiential learning has implemented in teacher education at University of North Carolina in their paper 2023. Another idea would be by using fictional video sequences or video sequences in general to raise awareness for uncertain situations and provoke reflections about the student teacher's own patterns of thinking about such situations and their reactions. And that is one of my latest projects, in research-based learning courses, when pre-service teachers take a closer look at schools and gather experiences as researchers. And by doing so, they will be confronted with lots of perplexities and doubts by doing research. For example, when observing the classes, and by doing so, making different observations, asking what has really happened. And they can take a transfer from being a researcher to being a teacher. On the other hand, there is a tendency to reduce uncertainty. We had it at the beginning. To make unavailability, as Hartmut Rosa puts it, available. The tendency towards unification, as Thomas Bauer puts it, is also evident in the education system. In the education system, education should become precisely measurable and more under control by means of precise curricula and what has to be learned. That is heavily discussed, for example, in the United States. By means of clearly defined competences measured by globally comparative, precise survey methods that measure exactly whether the goals have been achieved. and by means of targeted teaching and learning methods and evidence-based scientific research, which would determine exactly when and which adjustments need to be made. But education and deep, meaningful learning doesn't work like this. The subjects have their own voice and stubbornness, so they are able to refuse the offers given to them. The non-planability of results of teaching and learning have to be acknowledged. Such ambivalent demands of closing and on the one hand and opening of the other, such ambivalent demands of educational authorities and also parents on the one hand, and the main idea what teaching and deep meaningful learning might be, and the visions so many teachers have on the other hand, led to frustrations and not well-being among teachers. They feel torn back and forth between such divergent demands. A second conclusion for teacher education in view of such contradictions, we must prepare pre-service teachers for such ambivalences. Teachers have to realize that the relationship with the students is of a personal nature, but also of an institutional nature of this at the same time. For example, when they have to assess the learning results, not only at an individual level, but also according to the institutional and or national target. They also have to realize that they, as teachers, have their own ideas, interests, and visions, but they are also part of an organization which with its own rules. So a reflection of such ambivalences is necessary, as well as to learn to navigate and balance them, and to resist if the demand is against the ideas of pedagogical acting. To do this, student teachers must develop organizational awareness to find an open space for shaping the pedagogical landscape in school. I would like to end my presentation with an invitation to reflect one's own role in teacher education. We have to be aware of our essential role as university teachers. We have to think how we can encourage students to leave well-trodden paths. And we have to think about the space and pedagogical scenarios we can shape to prepare pre-service teachers for education in an age of crisis. I would like to give pre-service teachers a voice and present a short part of a group discussion among them at the end of a research-based course. In this part of the group discussion, they reflect about their perplexities or irritations, how they called it, in this course. PT means pre-service teacher. I mean, this is maybe putting it a bit strongly, but you are now also treated like that at uni. Everything is strictly set out. Everything is laid out for you. When do you ever do something freely? Nothing at all. And because yes, I think that was also why we were also all so irritated, because we suddenly had so much freedom in this research course. And I think it's incredibly difficult to focus on things when you have so much freedom. Yes, because we are not used to it anymore. The conclusion: educational organizations like schools, and in this case, the university in which teacher education takes place, have to reflect how much autonomy and open-mindedness we leave to the students and pre-service teachers, having the courage to let crises and uncertainties happen on our side as well. I would like to finish with 3 pictures and 3 messages for education in times of crisis. And I think you have realized that I like modern art, so I choose pictures in this way. What we, the next generation of teachers and the students in general need are visions to find solutions we do not know yet, courage to make a step in an open future, and time for critical reflection. So with this message, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this outstanding presentation. Now it's time for questions, so please feel free to ask your questions. Yeah, please. Or if you say it loud, then maybe we will hear it.
Professor, you said that there are many answers.
Sorry, but I have.
So, what do you think in the low sex schools are the same situation? What about you have taught, or I think this is a more vulnerable group of the children, of the learners. So, what do you think this answers is depend on the sex of the school or the social background of the school children?
Which schools do you mean?
So this low sex schools, for example.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I understand what you mean now.
Yes, I think in the answer will be the question also.
Yes, we have in our research, we have also examples in schools, not in gymnasium, but also in general secondary schools. And what happened there as well, that the children asked questions, but they were not taken earnest in their questions. And I think it's very important that we do that. And of course, there are some schools which are really difficult to treat with the children. I know that. But anyway, I think if we take the students earnest with their problems, with their ideas, then we can perhaps catch them and bring them to learning. Because you have to realize that some of the students, they have very heavily crisis in their biographies, if you think of these schools like that. We call them Brennpunktschulen. I don't know the word in English now. Where there are schools where children are with a low social income, low education. The parents depend on grants they get from the state, etc. And we realize, and it's also intermingled with migration. We have to realize that as well. But the migration is not the only point I want to tell, because we know from PISA, for example, that if you put away the migration status, only the social income and the education of parents is the most important fact. And I think it's difficult because and what I think, which is necessary, and that's what I said, we have to have an organizational awareness. I think many teachers try really very hard to cope with these children, but also not only on the topic of learning, but also setting the scene for them because of their social problems. But I would encourage teachers to say, okay, what is my job in the organization, and are there other positions which have another job, for example, social workers. And we know from other countries, in schools where there are social workers or nurses or something like that, psychologists, then the teacher can concentrate more on the learning process. So what I would encourage teachers to be aware that they are only part of an organization, and it's not always their task to cope with all the problems. That would be my answer.
Thank you. Is there any question left? If not,
But I just want to add, and I know that the administration will say there is no money. I know that. The same in Austria, the same in Germany. But we know from schools, like the best schools in Germany, then they organize money for that. And then suddenly they have more success. So I think it's to say, oh, no money, we have to cope with that. It's wrong, for me, the wrong path to walk to cope with learning of these children. So, sorry, came in my mind.
Okay, is there any question? If no, I'm going to encourage you to continue this fruitful discussion next to a coffee. So during the coffee break, I would like to thank in the name of the organization, organizers for this really wonderful speech, and we are really. It's our pleasure to welcome you in our academic cycles, and I hope that you will come soon and we will discuss
Okay.
each.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, something sweet. Oh, I like sweet.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. I not only like modern art, I also like sweets, so it's very good.
And is there something related to modern art too?
This one is related to modern art. I will have a look.
Is there something sweet
Yeah?
and something else too?
Ah, okay. Thank you very much. So.